quality. The visuals aren't going to be much today, but that doesn't matter. We really just want the audio, and I believe we are recording now. So hello everybody, this is Welcome Wednesday for the 12th of June, and we've got an interesting double header today. We're going to start off talking about reuse of Smithsonian data by third parties and beyond, I guess, even inside the institution, with Jen Hammock and Aaron Cope. Jen is with the Encyclopedia of Life, and Aaron is with Cooper-Hewitt. And then in our second hour from 1 until 2, we're going to hear from Richard Cooper, who's visiting us from the Cincinnati National Underground Railroad Freedom Center. And he's going to talk about mobile device distribution and also mobile signage. So without further ado, I'll hand over. Maybe Jen, because this was your idea as a topic, let me hand over to you to introduce it.
So hi everybody, I hope you can see me, but it's not that important. So I'm with the Encyclopedia of Life, and we have an interesting challenge ahead of us, which is analogous to one that the Smithsonian has in general. We have content, digital content online, that is sort of sitting in a warehouse right now. You can see it, you can search for it. It hasn't been made into any particularly palatable, digestible chunks of product until recently. And we have web services that would deliver this stuff to anyone who wanted to make a nice, palatable, digestible chunk of product. And it's just come out, that's the iTunes app, which there was a link for in the invitation to the session. And it's called Name It. If you don't have the link handy, if you go to iTunes and search for Name It, all one word, you'll find an icon with a tree on it. That's the one. We also have a few other web service run things developed by our own team, which are sort of analogous. And we're trying to figure out how to relate, especially to these outside developers. So, they're doing us a favor by getting our stuff out there. We're kind of doing them a favor by providing content for their thing. And there is a lot of interaction. We had extensive discussions with this vendor about the licensing restrictions of the content he was using. And we've been trying to help him promote his product. But this is the first time we've done this, so we're sort of groping our way. And I think this is fairly analogous to the potential of the Collection Central collection at SI, which is a bunch of content that could be made into lots and lots of cool things. And my understanding is there are web services for Collection Central because the app runs off them, right?
collections.si.edu. Yeah, there is an API to the collection search for the institution, and I think there are over 9 million objects in that system already.
And if it is public, it's not well published.
It's not a public API.
Okay. So there's some potential there for similar things to happen, but the Smithsonian hasn't jumped in that pool yet. So I wanted to discuss that sort of relationship in general, and for those of you who have iPhones or iPads or iPod Touches, I think those are the products that it might run on, I would love to do a quick user feedback session on this particular app as a service to my third-party vendor. So that's me. That was a little longer than I meant. Aaron, would you like to fill folks in?
Sure. So hi, everyone. My name is Aaron Cope. I have been at the Smithsonian for almost a year now. It will be a year in July. I gave myself an aggressively boring title when I got here, which I'm hoping to have changed to Head of Internet Typing. If anyone doesn't know, pardon?
Did you say Internet Typing?
Yes, I did.
Typing?
That is correct. That's basically what I do.
Just checking.
For those who don't know, I work with Seb Chan, and about 30% of my job is sitting with Seb trying to figure out what it means for the museum to become truly part of the internet, the network at large. And rather than just sort of the rubber ducky floating on the bathtub that it's often been in previous years. And And then the other 70% is actually building it because, and I think this goes to the subject pretty quickly, which is, historically museums just haven't had technical staff to do this. We have IT staff, but that's very different. And the good news is it's been changing over the last 5 or 10 years. But we've also had a tendency to outsource this stuff, to buy third-party vendor products that come with a predefined interface, and then having to shoehorn our data into it, and conversely, having to twist ourselves in knots to get the data back out. And that's really bad, particularly for an organization like the Smithsonian, which is a public good, right? I mean, whatever the specifics of our actual mandate, people think we are part of the government. They think we are the government. And I think we have a certain responsibility to fulfill in terms of actually, providing access to all of this stuff. The enormous effort that's gone into building the mall and all of the archives and keeping that stuff safe shouldn't be underestimated. It should continue to be celebrated. But not everyone can get to Washington or New York, as the case may be. Or even if you're in New York, lots of people don't want to go to the Upper East Side. And so in a world where the internet exists, I think that it behooves us to acknowledge that reality and to try and meet it. So part of that is providing access not simply to humans, right? The fact that the Smithsonian has an API that's not public is kind of terrible. I'm just going to say it. I don't know who else is in the room. I can't see anyone.
Oh, sorry. You know what? We really probably should have introduced ourselves, and maybe the folks online as well, so you know who you're speaking with.
Hi. I'm eating lunch over in the corner, so the chewing sounds you hear are from me, but I'm Marcella. I'm the Digital Engagement Manager for the National Museum of African American History and Culture, and I'm cheering you on in the corner, so don't worry about it.
And similarly over here in the other corner.
Hi, I'm Gina. I'm Nancy Parker's intern.
Hi.
And Gina's actually a Smithsonian veteran. She worked at Smithsonian Folkways last summer. So always great to know somebody who's already been through the baptism of fire that is our bureaucratic system. And I see Sonia online.
Hi, I'm Sonia Vargas. I'm Margie Schmuel's intern.
Hello.
And is there
Education Center.
Carlos? It's Carlos Parada, who does not have audio.
I do. Just it was muted.
Cool. I think that might be it for the moment. So, anyway, you're among friends, Aaron. So please continue.
Yeah. Well, I'll just wrap that up by saying that when we have talked to people about the work that we're doing, one of the things I often say is by the time we reopen, that the building itself will be the single largest consumer of the Cooper-Hewitt's API. That we will be creating an ecosystem that we can use to iterate and move quickly and sharing that out with people. And there's lots more to say, but I'll stop there and see where the conversation goes.
So I guess there are kind of two really interesting directions that strike me for this conversation, but anybody else should jump in too. One is the specific kind of ethical and business dilemmas, Jen, that I know EOL had as long as the Name It app was a paid app.
Yeah.
And kind of talking about, what should the Smithsonian's role be there in those situations. And then the other one really is to pick up on what Aaron said. We've got a lot of data here, and some of it even already has APIs built to it. But I think EOL's and Cooper-Hewitt's are the only two public APIs. Is that right? At the whole institution? Do you know, Aaron, of any others?
No, not specifically.
So you guys are the pioneers in opening up access to Smithsonian data, and I just think that's interesting, and we'd love to hear your thoughts about what it would take to do more.
Yeah, I would love to talk at least for a few minutes about the issue of the licensing, but certainly the other big one on our plate right now is the issue of how can we grow this, because the potential is huge, and the leverage is huge, because what we have done is sort of already done, and most of what we would need to invest in order to support outsiders in using our stuff is guidance and hand-holding, and so this is sort of a big opportunity to let other people do work for us, sending our content out into the world and increasing our impact. I'm interested, Aaron, and anyone else who has an opinion on this, what you think about the licensing issue, especially for Smithsonian content. EOL content is heterogeneous, but in most cases, at least, it's pretty well defined what the terms of use are. My understanding of Smithsonian asset terms of use is a little schizophrenic.
Yeah, I mean, I had the great advantage of not having to have to fight that battle before I got here. We made a decision that all of the metadata for our collection be released under a Creative Commons Zero license.
And the data, the assets, the image files?
So the images are still not. We are, and that's a function of image rights, not so much that we want to preserve the rights to the actual bits. We would like to release as much as possible where we can. We have a lot of things that we know are out of copyright. And so as much as anything, it is identifying those things and simply asserting that, I mean, more than likely it would be the functional equivalent of what Flickr did for the Commons, which was to introduce a no-known copyright license. And then from there, there will be a great in-between ground of things that we have to go back and get people to sign off on. So everything from 1927 or 1923 to the present. And then going forward, I think that, we're not going to force creators to cede their rights, but I think that we can encourage them to offer those up.
So it sounds like in your case, it sounds like you have a heterogeneous collection, in fact, although you have to identify it. But you speak of the individual rights of owners. So the majority of what you have is not the property of the Smithsonian?
We may or may not have the rights to share the imagery for it, right? In the sense that we didn't take the... So you get into some sort of weird, frankly, mind-boggling situations where we have, in fact we do, we have a shoe from Nike in our collection.
Okay.
And we have a photograph of it. But we didn't take the photograph, so it's not ours to put on the website or give away. Frankly, what we've probably got is a press shot, which makes the whole situation even more absurd. I mean, let's just be honest. You could go to Amazon and download these things, and Nike wouldn't care. But at the same time, particularly because we are the Smithsonian, we do have a responsibility to do right by the people whose work we collect. And so we err on the side of caution. The situation is compounded by the fact that, and I actually think this is an opportunity for us, that we allow photography in the galleries, and we have a collection increasingly of things that are mass-produced, that many people have copies of, and people have pretty powerful camera phones in their pockets. So I think that that's an avenue for trying to get around this problem, and then also being able to demonstrate to rights holders that, like, seriously, it's not that big a deal. You actually will benefit by having your thing And I think this goes all the way back to the question of the collections at large, that, you know, your thing will be out in the world. People will be aware of it. People will be able to do things with it. People doing strange things with your stuff doesn't undermine its value or its importance. So, does that answer your question?
It's a really interesting way to put it, Aaron, because it does kind of identify an often unspoken fear that, as you say, people doing strange things with images of your stuff will somehow devalue the thing in and of itself. And I am always struck by how a lot of times the risk aversiveness or the fear in these kinds of situations seems to come back to a fundamental insecurity, or it betrays a fundamental insecurity in the value of our collections. I mean, if we really do think this stuff is all great and our institutions are important, why do we feel we have to defend them so rigorously?
Because, I mean, you articulated this fear, Aaron, on behalf of what sounds like external rights holders, but I do think this is the Smithsonian itself is also imbued with the same reluctance. I mean, all the content that EOL receives from the collection central services it's filtered to include only what the Smithsonian owns. There's a little bit more content in there. This is all from the Natural History Museum.
Mm-hmm.
There is a little content that we probably could figure out how to use, but the simple first cut was just, it's all Smithsonian owned. And that's all under the CC by NCSA license, which a lot of people argue is totally illegal because you can't license something that's in the public domain, and most of that stuff was produced by federal employees, so it's not clear what gave us the right to put that license on it. And EOL simply asked the museum, what do you want us to use, and we did what they said. And we can modify that at any time if they instruct us, but right now we're obeying the party line, which reflects the institutional fear, as far as I can tell.
Has anybody ever challenged the Smithsonian in court on something like that?
Not that I know of, but I wouldn't necessarily know because my sphere is, you know, pretty much just the one museum.
Marcella, sorry.
I was going to say I've had a lot of conversations with, hello. I've had a lot of conversations with Aaron Starn, who is one of the OGC lawyers at the Smithsonian who deals with copyright of online material. And I'll just put in a plug for her. She's amazing and fabulous, and anytime you can get her on the phone, she's super happy to talk about anything. She said that we have never been challenged on a Creative Commons license. But that was secondary to the point I actually wanted to make, which is, at least from my end, and it's kind of a darker view than what Nancy suggested about insecurity of our collection. I feel like, at least from a museum that deals with history and culture so much, there is a real fear or a real desire to control interpretation through controlling imagery of our collection. And I think that's different, although certainly very related and you know, inextricably linked to insecurity about how people will use it.
Right.
But I feel like that interpretive piece is very crucial to the way that a lot of people think about stuff. Yeah.
I mean, on some levels, well, I guess that's the issue, is that we could, you know, the good news is we're in a position where we can almost have it both ways. I don't think anyone wants the Smithsonian to give up its interpretive, what's the word I'm looking for?
Leadership?
Thank you. Yes. I mean, I think people would be sad and disappointed and upset, right? I mean, at that point,
Absolutely.
we've reduced our collection to little more than media assets for lunchboxes and, you know, other licensing opportunities. But that doesn't mean that we can't celebrate it and indulge people their desire to find other ways to use it. I think that there's some issues around proving and asserting provenance that are problematic. But I think this is one of the opportunities that, you know, this is actually the kind of thing that the internet makes possible. It's not perfect yet, but your the tools that allow us to preserve our authority. One of the things that we have done is put all those collection records on GitHub. If anyone's not familiar with GitHub, it's actually a source control tool for developers, so sharing code. And a lot of people, not just us, a lot of people have sort of been looking at it and thinking, gosh, those are a lot of tools that we might be able to use for data. And the most important thing about it is that it allows us to assert a truth in our collection. It allows other people to make a copy of it and run away and do something with it. And more than anything, it allows us the infrastructure to deny those changes from being folded back into the core. It does mean that those two things are still out there. But if someone needs to, they can always consult with us and see what the source of truth is. And I actually think that's really important, because the other model that always gets tossed around is Wikipedia. And the biggest problem with Wikipedia for an institution like the Smithsonian, or frankly any museum, is that it quickly descends into edit wars. And those are just gigantic time sinks. And that becomes a real burden, and I think that becomes a disincentive for us to participate. But I think that, you know, if we stood up as the Smithsonian and said, this is our stuff, it belongs to you, here is the canonical source of truth. If there is ever any doubt, check here. I think that would go a long way towards making people feel a little more comfortable. And then, you know, in the magic hand-wavy universe that doesn't exist yet, what would it mean for someone to be able to take a resource, say an object record or a photograph or something, and hand it back to the Smithsonian and say, yes, no, has someone done something with this? Do you agree? I don't really know what that means, but it's an interesting idea to think about.
We're kind of doing that master copy thing at EOL currently. We have, I mean, it's complicated by the fact that we're an aggregator, so we are not the owner of the truth, but we facilitate people who want to ask questions or challenge or offer comments, corrections. We facilitate communication of those people back to the owners, who can then revise their master copy. And I haven't seen any significant difficulties or complexity arise out of that yet. I would say probably the thing that the greatest challenge right now is that there aren't that many people interested in offering that kind of feedback. So it's, in a sense, it would be a nice problem to have if there were raging controversy about all the content we display, and we were constantly breaking up fights about it or whatever.
I actually had the impression that part of Wikipedia's interest in museums and kind of real push to get Wikipedians in residence and stuff was precisely because they kind of wanted somebody to step in and be the authority to end the edit wars and allow the whole thing to move forward. That's my interpretation. I could be completely wrong, but it is interesting how the more crowdsourced content and the more content period there is in the internet, in a sense, I think the greater value that a trusted brand and authoritative voice seems to have, precisely to kind of cut through the noise. Yeah. For better or for worse, you know, it's odd how this ultimate democratization actually oddly seems to shore up some very entrenched power structures and systems, you know, like the fact that, as they discovered, and you know, there's been the big Ada camp and other initiatives to redress the gender imbalance in among the editors for Wikipedia. You know, isn't it weird how global patriarchy seems to have structured this, you know, the ultimate democratic information source, ironically?
I don't think people want experts to go away. I mean, I think people understand that's how things get done, right? I mean, we all rely on it, but
Right.
You know, I think that it can't just be a unidirectional broadcast model anymore. I think people want to be able to. One of the things I've been sort of fascinated by for the last little while is you know, you go particularly to fine art museums, and what you see more than anything is, so just pretend that's a painting behind me. You see are people do. I'm not gonna try and mime it out. What you see are people taking selfies of themselves, right? Like, if I worked in a fine art museum, I would be all over that. I would want every single one of those pictures. That's amazing. That's a sort of fascinating look into, you know, just people's experience of those works.
Not to mention great free viral marketing.
I mean, yeah. I just, you know, I mean, I think that, I think it is to have that confidence in our own interpretation and not, it's, I mean, what is the harm in someone rethinking an object? What is the harm in, I mean, why are we collecting this stuff, I guess is the point.
Right.
If we don't want people to do it again.
Particularly for an institution like the Smithsonian, which, you know, sort of straddles a lot of different roles. It is, on the one hand, meant to just be sort of an archive and a scientific, you know, collection of scientific data for ongoing investigation. But I think the great advantage that the Smithsonian has is that it is essentially the museum of the future now. I mean, it is the museum of the United States. And, you know, the last time I checked, the United States wasn't going anywhere. So that means we have both the responsibility and the opportunity to collect the future now, to engage with the present. We aren't just a considered reflection on everything that's gone before us. And at the same time, you know, we're here to collect America. So that sort of creates a pretty large surface area to work on, and why not let people play around with that?
Well, not to mention the fact that we'll never have enough staff, time, and resources to do it all ourselves.
Yeah.
Even with a staff of 6,000.
So I would point out I've been sort of keenly aware of this because one of the side projects I have is something called Parallel Flickr, which was meant to try and reimagine what an archive of a social service might look like as a living, breathing thing, rather than just like the sort of traditional bag of folders and files. And, you know, notwithstanding all the changes that have happened in the last couple of years, the first time I did a talk about Parallel Flickr, I was saying, you know, you've always been able to get all of your data out of Flickr using the API, but that has meant that you have to be comfortable with the API, and so it's introduced a sort of a burden on people. And one of the reasons we did that, well, there were a couple of reasons. One is we were super busy just trying to keep the site up, and the second reason was we were hoping that a third party would actually build that service. We wanted somebody else to build a download, backup, archiving tool. The paradox was that we had done enough things right that people basically trusted us with everything. No one ever even imagined backing their photos up. They were just like, whatever, you put it in Flickr and it'll be good. And that was, you know, we should all endeavor to build something that people trust that way. But paradoxically, it meant that there was no incentive for a third party to build a tool. So you get into those weird splits, which I don't know what that means for the Smithsonian. I don't know what that means for cultural heritage, but I think it's an interesting thing to keep in mind.
Ironically, a victim of your own success.
So the question is, who is the person who would be motivated to come along and make a thing that you wish someone would make? Which in that case, someone who wants to provide society with the security of a backup service, and there's no market for it, so nobody arose. I am wondering what that I'm sure there are similar problems with cultural heritage stuff.
Well, you would have Flickr would need to fail, and then you'd see the third-party systems popping up.
Yeah, and you know, when I've talked about this, you know, I've talked about it as, you know, part of this larger question of archiving and preservation, particularly for digital things, because they can be so ephemeral, and big companies are pretty cavalier with people's stuff. And you know, and it was that idea that, you know, should services take more of an active role in encouraging people to archive their own things? You know, in the business world, that's traditionally seen as suicide or as an admission of failure. I don't agree with that at all. And so that was, you know, we're sort of straying off into parallel Flickr territory, which I'm happy to stay here if people want. But, you know, that idea of trying to build a living, breathing service that wasn't competing with the original thing. It was just that confidence that when the shiny thing went away, there would still be something left, right? Like, a lot of people are going to be very surprised when Facebook goes away one day. That's going to be a real drag for people. So I think, you know, but for cultural heritage institutions, you know, we are sort of saddled with this problem of feeling like you know, we have to operate in the short term when it comes to digital things. There has to be like a return on investment, like an immediate return on investment.
Do you think cultural heritage institutions really feel that? I was going to argue that our business model in some ways is the opposite.
Yeah, but if you are actually, like, if you create something, you know, an online exhibit or an offering of some kind, and maybe that's just the technology environment or the technology market, but yeah, I feel like, you know, you can tell in a month or so whether you have succeeded with that widget that you built. And I don't know if there's any way to get around that, because if what you built was, you know, a website or an app or a media thing of any kind, not a lot of those things are timeless exactly. I don't think their marketing operates on that long-term time scale that the rest of our stuff
Yeah, and that's fascinating actually as an observation, because the rest of the mission-driven bits of the museum business really do have, you know, the complete opposite in terms of principles and goals. So, you know, you have to do, you're maintaining collections that are by definition priceless. So everything that you do around them should be of the highest possible quality in terms of scholarship and interpretation and education and all of that. And you have to do it forever, right? Because unlike Flickr or Facebook or any other business, if you get in trouble, you can't just sell out, you know, and then open up across the street the next day under a different name and go back into business, right? I mean, you think about how long most museums have been around, you know, some of them hundreds of years, and the average life of a business, and this was before the dot-com boom, is only 13 years. So it's as though the digital work that we're doing is completely misaligned with our larger business mission and structures, kind of ways of work.
But I'm not sure it's that different from other historical, you know, sort of ancillary work that happens on top of the collection. Exhibitions are the exact same thing. You run it for 6 months, and then you put that stuff back in storage and bring out another batch of stuff. You publish a catalog or whatever, and that has a print run, and then it's over. I mean, isn't that the sort of the other piece of being a cultural heritage thing?
Sort of the educational component of it in a way.
You have to keep it fresh. It has to be a bunch of temporary things.
Impact on people, and that I think there is a strong push to measure that in a relatively short framework, and that's one of the challenges I see in museum education, or one of the tensions that a lot of people are trying to figure out, is how do you measure the impact of a 9-year-old who goes to a museum and remembers that 30 years later. I mean, that kind of data is so hard to capture, but I think that's true as well of our digital platforms. They're somewhat aligned in that way in terms of you've got this instant feedback of numbers and metrics, but what does that really mean, and how can you measure that over a person's lifetime?
I mean, when I've been talking about collections and APIs, you know, what they do, it's not that the digital thing, it's not to create a celebrity deathmatch between the digital stuff and the real stuff. You know, and that issue is going to get even more complicated as more and more of the stuff that we collect is digital, right? We're not even going to have the luxury of that argument anymore.
Yeah, that's.
But you know, there are real physical, like we still live in the physical world, and we are bound by the constraints of that world in what and how we can show stuff. But then, you know, there's a real question. It's like, if we're never going to show this stuff, like if it only just gets trapped in, you know, in a little box devoid of oxygen and light, it's a little bit of a conceptual art piece, really. I mean, why are we doing it? Is it the confidence that one day it can come out of the box? I mean, that's just pure theoretical.
Yeah, speculating.
But so the point is, my argument is not that, you know, the Smithsonian should divest of its collection or any other museum. But the point is that the digital proxies, and you know, in many cases that isn't simply nothing more than an incomplete record, allow us to create a sort of communal proof that something exists. I think that aside from our expertise as scholars, our interpretation, what is most important for people is that there is somebody who is charged with taking care of this stuff. And to have the confidence that it will still be there, you know, if they turn around and go for lunch. And, you know, again, the digital stuff, it's not really clear how it will play out. It's early days. But I think if we approach it with that, if we're clear on the motivation about why we're doing something, then I think that's what will ring true to people. So just from a mechanical brass tacks point of view, one of the things that we've started doing for the collection's metadata dumps is we have divided the collection up into all the first-class objects, so people, individual objects, media, that sort of thing. And we have published one file per thing. It's not really optimized. We need to change that. But each one of those files is an API response. It's the same document that you would get back if you called the Cooper-Hewitt API. So in effect, downloading with Cooper-Hewitt is making every single API call you could. Do I have a thesis statement behind that? I'm not sure. It's kind of a hunch. It just seems like a good practice. And it provides sort of, you know, it means that all of the things in our collection start to have a mass or a weight in the universe around which the broader community can start to orbit.
I think that concept of broader community is perhaps precisely the point of cultural disconnect. I've just been reflecting on everything that's been said here in your question, Aaron, of what are museums for, what are collections for. I suspect that a lot of the people who have the greatest control and authority over museums, which would be directors who are generally former curators and then curators principally, would say that we collect that stuff for research and scholarship first and foremost, which means that, you know, the incredible expense that has gone to collect and preserve these objects and present them, even in a very limited way, is really all aimed at a tiny elite of researchers and scholars. And that's, you hear it in a lot of the interpretation. It's curators talking to curators. And that has just been kind of assumed to be good, right? It's not a question that it's a good thing to preserve this stuff for scholarship and research. So the idea of preserving it for the point of making it accessible to a broader public, although we say that a lot, I think in practice that's actually a fairly new idea. And maybe museum culture hasn't actually fully assimilated it yet. And we're still struggling with really believing at a gut level that that's valuable and important to do. Whereas I don't think that there are too many curators who question in their gut whether it's valuable to collect and preserve stuff for the purpose of scholarship and research. I think they're all pretty well convinced of that.
Well, that's a matter of degree too. I mean, there's a question of how many copies of this thing do you really need? But so the question of whether it is our obligation to make this stuff available, is that what explains the APIs not being public? Sometimes there's also questions of capacity, that's why.
Okay, so the collections API, and don't quote me, and I know this is being recorded, but I will invite people who can speak more authoritatively to me to correct this in the blog post that we'll link this recording to. But my understanding is that in the early days when the concept of the cross-collection search was created, there was even less acceptance of the idea of open access to data. And a lot of the museums who made their collections available for that indexing did so with certain provisos about the reuse of the data. So it's now the classic case of having to go back and ask them to, agree to let there be use. And, again, it's the sort of thing that once we've reached the cultural tipping point internally, and I think we're close to it, I don't think that's going to be a hard sell. But until then, it really does feel like pushing a boulder uphill. And so it's a tough one to attack because it's a very emotional subject.
And it's complicated by issues of rights, as you were mentioning. I know that in our collection we have, in some cases, gotten very limited rights to put things on a collection search, which does not mean that we are able to allow reuse of that.
And that differs, I think, from museum to museum how those are handled. I think there's the export from natural history that goes to Collections Central, and there's also the one that's available on the individual departmental searches at the museum level, and there's the one that we get at EOL, and there are slight differences, I think, between all of those, based on those edge cases where we have certain permissions but not other permissions.
I think there are, in addition to the kind of cultural and copyright issues, I think there are also some issues of technical compatibility. Mm-hmm. So I have been told, and again, I might be misremembering this, so don't quote this as gospel, but that particularly in the case of natural history, which is the largest bulk of the items. Of the 137 million objects, which is a very loose number that gets thrown around, I think 124 million are supposed to be at natural history, and half of those are fleas or something, right? But that there were issues of technical compatibility that meant getting that content into a centralized search index was not as easy as one might have hoped.
That could be. I understand the whole, the DAMS thing, like many other processes, took longer than expected, and there's probably a number of technical reasons for that, yeah. So this is probably less relevant to everyone but me and Aaron, but I would love to talk for a few minutes about, like, pretending we get that boulder pushed up the hill. What happens when that public web service suite is available, and we are committed to the idea of people doing stuff, because we did that at EOL a few years ago, And we've heard a lot of crickets since then. I mean, there are some people starting to use it now, and as we get feedback on our APIs, we know in some cases why why more people aren't using them. And part of that is the quality and robustness of the web services. As we improve them, they become easier to use. We hope they will be more widely adopted.
Somebody's coming to get you. Somebody's coming to get you right now.
Sorry. No worries. And one of the things that we're sort of wondering, I guess, at this point, how can we get people interested in this free stuff we're trying to give away? That, I imagine, will be a thing for you guys at Cooper-Hewitt in a moment also.
Yeah, Aaron, I think you and Seb and I think Micah as well have already kind of talked about this a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a series of overlapping issues there. One of them is that is just institutional patience. It takes people a while to warm up to some ideas sometimes, right? People are busy. And when you throw, particularly in our case, like a gigantic bag of possibilities at them, it's a little overwhelming, and it's that, that same, the old experience when there were record stores of walking into a record store and just having brain freeze and not knowing where to start. And I think that, we, particularly the Smithsonian, because it is so big, because it is, a public good, we have the opportunity to be patient and to let people warm up to an idea. And those things often start to grow, not quite exponentially, but exponentially enough.
Concave curve.
Pardon?
Just because we've got almost nothing right now, that doesn't mean it'll be very, very little in 10 years, because it can be expected to accelerate.
Yeah, well, I mean, people don't always realize what something is for, and then, if, again, this comes back to one of the things I've been talking about recently, and is that we, as cultural heritage institutions, sort of need to have the confidence to be invisible, which is very different from not being present. But no one wonders whether Wikipedia is in their back pocket, right? I can go to Wikipedia right now and find something out. And then I would put my phone away. And that is its strength. That is why people keep going back to it. So it's that question of reliability and quality, but also, I don't need to have a Wikipedia experience every time I walk out the door. And I think that's what I was talking about when I mentioned the sort of the weird obsession with return on investment. And I think that a lot of that, I'll come back to the part where we have been very bad at hiring and encouraging and nurturing technical staff. Because what that staff allows us is the ability to build things quickly and, just as importantly, cheaply, to be able to do things on principle and say, actually, the cost is minimal. We're doing this because, we think it's the right thing to do. And then to just sit back and be patient. For the same reason.
Isn't also this idea that precisely because it takes time for people to realize that the data is there and to figure out what to do with it, that really we should be building these systems, the APIs, and cleaning up our data first and foremost for our own use, because then we know we've at least got one client. And that hopefully some of those uses will then inspire others. I feel like that's an idea that I heard first at Cooper-Hewitt. Is that right, Aaron?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we have not traditionally built systems that are designed for input-output. We tend to believe, we tend to build these battleships that have to take into account everyone's requirements, rather than building very small systems that are designed to do one thing, and the inputs and the outputs are well defined, and then there's usually like a human being in the middle connecting them. But the cost of that is minimal. Sorry, I didn't mean to kill
Almost at our hour. Well, I was just kind of thinking we're almost at our hour mark. So maybe just, I don't know if you both have or anybody else in the conversation has any kind of final thoughts they want to add before we switch gears rather dramatically.
I guess I was just a little confused by EOL said that you guys already have an implemented system, right, for distributing content?
Yeah,
Like,
we did.
do you have a target audience, or who do you expect might want to use your content? Or
You mean to to use their web services, like someone who wants to offer a product of their own, or direct users?
yeah, or I guess I'm a little confused at what content you're distributing or how you would like
How do you think people are going to use your API, or who your target is?
Basically, what we have that people are currently most likely to use are media, images mostly, also video, that kind of thing. And basically, anybody who wants to make a pretty nature-related product, app or website or what have you. We have sort of a vast bag of wildlife pictures and video and sounds. And there is abundant evidence in the iTunes store and various other places that people do like to create these things and sell them or give them away. Mostly, I think, currently for educational purposes, people who want to make, a bird watcher's guide to region X, that kind of thing. That's the most obvious demographic that has occurred to me. But really, there wasn't much that we could do to target our APIs, so we just sort of put them out there and waited to see what would happen.
okay.
Sorry, everyone, I have to jump off. But
Yeah, I
lovely.
guess
Thank you so
that's saved by the bell, huh, Aaron? Thank you both,
Thank you.
Jen and Jen, and I can't figure out, left and right or backwards here. Thanks everybody for joining us, and I'll post the link to this recording, and we'll see. It'll be on the Smithsonian 2.0 blog, infamously hosted at WordPress.com. And hopefully it'll become a hotbed of debate, but I doubt it.
All right. Bye.
All right.
Aaron.
Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to stop this recording and I'm going to restart so we have a break between our two videos.